In 1951, Lake folklorist Richard Chase published a book entitled Wicked John and the Devil, which was a Southern Appalachian version of an old Scotch-Irish folk tale known as Jack of the Lanterns, traditionally told on Samhain's Eve, what in this country we call Halloween. Then I read that in the 1960s, Richard's book was banned from school libraries in East Greenbush, New York, because they considered it blasphemous, which sealed the deal for me. After that, I couldn't wait to start telling it. So here's my rendering of Wicked John and the Devil, that except for a few little twists here and there, pretty much follows the version told by Richard Chase. A long time ago, back in the hills of southern Appalachia, there lived a blacksmith named John, who was so mean and wicked that that description of him just sort of stuck, so that folks in that region just naturally called him Wicked John. Now, in addition to being mean and wicked, John was also a contrarian, meaning whereas most folks like to do good, he generally did wrong and liked it. And as most folks tend to be right-minded, he was naturally wrong-headed. Add to that, he didn't care a lick about anyone but himself and laughed at other people's misfortunes. But he was the only blacksmith in town, so he could care less about customer service, as not caring was naturally the one thing he cared most about. Thus, with no competition to keep him in line, Wicked John just continued to get meaner and meaner and wickeder, until stories about his orneriness began to spread beyond his own town into neighboring towns, then into neighboring states, and then countries and hemispheres, until eventually making their way to the very top, St. Peter's office, just outside the pearly gates of heaven, where St. Peter and the angels that clerk for him record in a book every good and evil deed of everyone here on earth. And lately, they were falling behind trying to keep up with the torrent of John's evil deeds, until finally St. Peter decided it was time that he came down to earth to see for himself if John was really as mean and wicked as the reports indicated. So one day, not long after, John was out in his shop. He was pounding out a horseshoe on his anvil when he looked up, and there standing in his doorway was an old man, barefoot and bent over, wearing a dirty poncho and supporting himself with two willow walking sticks. And John, when he saw him, got a snarl in his lip and said, "And what is it you want?" And the old man said, "Well, neighbor, I wonder if you might spare me a cup of water and perhaps a bite to eat. You see, I've been walking all day and I'm powerful thirsty." And John told him, "I ain't your neighbor. Now get out of my doorway." As he stomped around his anvil toward the old man, he was fixing to slam the door in his face. And out of the corner of his eye, he spotted something shimmery under the old man's poncho, which gave him pause, and he thought, maybe he's got some gold under there. So, thinking better of it, he invited the traveler in and sat him down at the table, where he brought him a big plate of victuals: smoked ham with collard greens, baked turnips and cornbread, a big bowl of black-eyed peas, and a glass of sweet milk to wash it all down with. And when he'd finished with that, Wicked John, still thinking about all that gold, asked, "Well, old man, is there anything else I can get you?" Whereupon the old man, he pushed back from the table. Then, discarding his poncho, he rose from his seat, straightening up into his full divine stature, clothed in a shimmering white robe, clasped at the waist with a gold chain, from which hung a huge golden key. And John, unimpressed, looked him up and down and said, "And just who are you supposed to be?" Whereupon St. Peter said, "Why, John, I'm St. Peter. Don't you recognize me? And John replied, well, I'm supposed to. Then, without missing a link, he continued, now let's see, we talk about forking over a link or two of that gold chain in payment for that sumptuous meal I just fed you. And St. Peter said, why, John, I'll do much better than that. For the kindness you have shown me and your future happiness, I shall grant you 3 wishes. 3 wishes? 3 wishes, John, for your future happiness. 3 wishes? 3 wishes, John says. Ah, it's probably fool's gold anyway. All right then, 3 wishes. I'll give you 3 wishes. You see that rocking chair over there? Out there, it's my favorite chair. It's where I like to sit and eat my lunch and rock a while before I go back to work. But every day at lunchtime, invariably, there's a customer, or worse yet, one of my wife's holier than thou friends is sitting in it, and I have to eat my lunch standing up. So I just wish anyone who so much as sits in my chair, I'll stick to it. Well, it rocks back and forth harder and harder, and you can't get out until I say so. And St. Peter said, why, John, he was a bit surprised at his vindictiveness. Is that your wish? To which John confirmed, aye, it is, he said. So St. Peter conceded, very well then, John, if that's truly your wish, you shall have it, leaving you with only 2 more, which I'd hate to see you waste. So might I remind you, John, that you haven't lived an altogether pious life, to be perfectly frank, and these 3 wishes are a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make things right. Make things right, you see. Yes, John. Not pious, you see. That's right, John. Well, all right then, you see a hammer over there on the floor, that sledgehammer. Yes, John. Well, every time I need that hammer to do my work, I can't find it. Know why? I'll tell you why. Because my pious neighbors, they borrow it and they return it. And I have to, whenever I need it to do my work, I have to stop whatever I'm doing, figure out which of my pious neighbors borrowed it, then leave my shop unattended while I go hunting for my own hammer. So to make things right, I just wish anyone who so much as touches my hammer, they'll stick to their hand while it pounds and pounds and may stop pounding until I say so. And St. Peter said, why, John, that's not quite the type of piousness I had in mind. I was thinking more along the lines of, well, caring for others. And as soon as he said that, John's whole demeanor changed. His face noticeably softened and a tear formed in the corner of his eye. And he said, did you happen to notice that thorn bush growing outside my front door? Why, yes, St. Peter said, hopefully. Well, I raised that thorn bush from a little sprig. You know, I watered and tended it, looked over it like it was one of my own, made sure it had everything it needed to grow up big and thorny. But you know, these townspeople, they come up here, they back their wagons over it and strip branches off it to make switches. Breaks my heart how they treat my thorn bush. So to show how much I care, I just wish anyone who touches my thorn bush, they'll get sucked down into the middle of it and they can't get out until I see so. And St. Peter, well, he had nothing more to say. So he just shook his head, turned, walked out the door, and went back up to heaven. John, he didn't care. He just shrugged his shoulders, went back to work, pounding out the horseshoe on his anvil as if nothing ever happened. Well, time went on. John continued to get meaner and meaner and wickeder, until stories about his orneries got to be so bad that they began to catch the attention of the devil. Because if there's one thing in this world the devil will not tolerate, it's a human being having a reputation, a bigger reputation for meanness and wickedness than himself. So he wanted to meet this John, and he sent his 2 sons to fetch him. So one day, not long after, John was out in his shop. He was fixing a wagon wheel for a customer when a knock came at his door. And when he opened it, there standing in his doorway was a little red devil with little red devil horns and a little red devil tail with a barb at the end of it, and two tiny little cloven hooves for feet. And John, when he saw him, looked him up and down and said, "What is it you want?" And that little red devil with kind of an attitude said, "Mister, my daddy wants to meet yous, and he sent me here to fetch you back." And John said, "Well, all right. But I promised this customer I'd have his wagon fixed for him today by 5. So why don't you come in, make yourself at home in that rocking chair over there while I finish up?" So the little red devil, he comes in, sits down in the rocking chair. As soon as he does, it starts rocking it's all by itself, back and forth and back and forth. And the little devil, he kind of likes that. But then it started rocking a little bit harder, and then harder and faster, it wouldn't stop. And the little devil, his poor head's banging against the backboard going, Mister, make it stop, make it stop." And John said, "I'll make it stop if you promise to go away and never bother me again." And the little red devil, his head still banging against the backboard, tells him, "Okay, I promise, I promise." And John said, "Well, all right then, let him go." And that little red devil, why, he skedaddled out of there faster than a cat lapping chain lightning. Spew! Well, next day, John was back out in his shop. He was straightening out a spade for a customer. He'd stick that spade in the hot coals, and then he'd pound it flat on the anvil with his sledgehammer when there came a knock at his door. And when he opened it, this time standing in the doorway was a medium-sized devil with medium-sized horns and a medium-sized tail, and two cloven hoofs for feet, a little bigger than his brothers. And John, when he saw him, looked him up and down and said, "And pray tell, what is it you want?" The medium-sized devil says, "Mister, my daddy wants to meet yous, and he sent me here to fetch yous back." And John said, "Well, all right, but I promised this customer I'd have his speed straightened for him today. So why don't you come in, make yourself at home in that rocking chair?" But the medium-sized devil, he'd been briefed by his little brother, see? So he goes, "Oh, no. I ain't sitting in your rocking chair." And John said, "Well, all right. Well, it's going to be a while. Unless, of course, you want to give me a hand. So if you'll just pick up that hammer over there, you can pound on the speed while I hold it flat on the anvil. That way we'll get done quicker." So the medium-sized devil, he goes over and picks up the hammer. And as soon as he does, it starts pounding on the anvil all by itself. Pang, 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 pang. Then it starts pounding a little faster. Pang, 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 and faster. Pang, 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 and faster. Pang, 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 pang. Each time hitting him in the forehead on the rebound. Ping, pang, ping, pang, ping, pang. Just knocking the hell out of him. And the medium-sized devil's telling him, Mister, make it stop, make it stop." And John said, "I'll make it stop if you promise to go away and never bother me again." And the medium-sized devil, I promise, make it stop." John says, "Well, all right then, let him go." And just like his little brother, spew, that medium-sized devil was down the road as well. Well, a few days later, John was back out in his shop when all of a sudden, crash, bang, the door was kicked wide open, almost taking it off its hinges. And there standing in the doorway, filling up the entire doorway and then some, was the devil himself. And he was hopping mad. And John, when he saw him, looked him up and down and said, "Well now, let me guess." And the devil said, "That's right, John, the devil. And just for the record, John, I don't like the way you treated my boys, John. So now you're coming with me, and you're coming with me now, John." And John said, "Well, all right, but I promised this customer. So if you'll just come in and make yourself comfortable in that rocking chair over there." And the devil said, "I ain't sitting in your rocking chair, John." And John said, well, then suit yourself, but it's going to be a while. Unless, of course, you want to give me a hand. So if you'll just pick up that hammer over there. But the devil said, I ain't touching your hammer neither. And John said, well, then I guess you're just going to have to come get me. So the devil and wicked John commenced to fighting. And they were both getting about as good as they were giving when John landed a right hook the devil never saw coming, which knocked him head over heels clean out the front door. And John, he just started laughing. Well, until the devil shook it off. And when he looked over, he saw that thorn bush growing by the side of the door. And he thought, I'll just strip me a big old switch off of this thorn bush, and I'll beat that old man with it with an inch of his life. So the devil, he reached over, fixing to peel him off a big old switch. But as soon as he touched that thorn bush, see you, it sucked him down to the middle of it, poked him all over until he ended up with only his 2 cloven feet sticking out of the top. And John, when he saw that, laughed and slammed the door shut. Well, next morning, he opened the door back up. And sure enough, still sticking straight out of that thorn bush were the devil's 2 cloven feet. Now, John, he leaned over real close and he heard this pleading voice saying, don't suppose you'd consider letting me go, would you? And John said, well, I would, if you promised to go away and never bother me again. And the devil, real contrite like, said, I promise. So John let him go. Well, time went on, and wicked John, he just continued to get meaner and meaner and wickeder until one day he just up and died, which would have been the end of it for most folks. But like I said, John was a contrarian. So when he realized he was dead, he rose up out of his spirit body and started walking. And he walked until he came to a fork in the road, where he remembered something his old pappy once told him. He said, John, which was before he was known as wicked, his pappy said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. So he did. And before long, it led him straight up to the pearly gates of heaven, which were closed. So seeing no one, John looked around until he spied a little building off to the side with a sign on the door. St. Peter's office. Just the man I want to see. So he opened the door and walked inside, where St. Peter, who was busy working at his desk, looked up and gasped, why, John, what are you doing here? And John said, well, I died, so I thought I'd come up to heaven. And St. Peter said, oh, no, John, you can't come here. And John said, well, why not? So St. Peter went over to the bookcase and he pulled out the book. Then he opened it to John's page and pointed and said, look here, John, this is your page. You see here on the front, I've recorded all of your good deeds. Oh, look here, John. Here's the time I came down to see you. And, well, that seems to be about it. Well, then over on the back is where all of your evil deeds have been recorded, John, which unfolded like an accordion. Page after page stapled to one another, spilled down the front of the bookcase and across the floor. And St. Peter said, John, I had to hire 2 extra clerks just to keep up. No, I'm sorry, John, but you can't stay here. You'll have to go down there. John didn't care. He just shrugged, turned around, walked out the door, back to the fork in the road, taking the other one. And after walking for a while, he came within sight of the gates of hell, where the devil out front was barbecuing a few souls. And when he looked up and saw John coming, he said, oh my God, it's wicked John. Then he hollered to his 2 boys, medium-sized devil and little devil. He said, boys, get inside. So the 2 little devils, they ran inside, followed by Big Daddy Devil himself, who slammed the gates of hell shut, and for good measure wrapped a chain around a few times and locked it with a padlock. And when John got up to the gates, the devil asked, John, what are you doing here? And John said, well, I died. But St. Peter, he wouldn't let me into heaven. He said I had to come down here. And the devil said, oh, no, John, you can't come in here. You remember what happened last time I tries to get you in here? And John said, well, then where am I supposed to go? So the devil, he thought for a minute, and then he got an idea. Beside him was a big pile of pumpkins he was roasting to go along with his barbecue. So he picked one up, sliced off the top, scooped out the insides. Then he carved 2 triangle holes in that pumpkin for eyes, another one just below that for a nose. Then he carved a wide, jaggly mouth below that. Then with his tongs, he reached into the fire pit and pulled out 2 coals and set them inside. Then handed it to John and said, here, John, take this jack-o'-lantern to light your way, and go find a place of your own. And to this day, John is still roaming, looking for his place. So on All Hallows Eve, when the veil separating the spirit world from ours rises, people light jack-o'-lanterns and place them on their porches and windowsills to light the way for Wicked John and to keep him from entering their place.